Kathy, thank you so much for joining us. And I know clubs certainly around Australia and perhaps even the world would be interested to meet you and hear more of your story.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell me, Australia, you've just been here. What were you doing?
I was lucky enough to be appointed as a president's representative for Rotary International this year. And for those of you who don't know what that is, being a president's representative, the president of Rotary International isn't able to attend every district conference around the world for obvious reasons. And so he or she, whoever the president is at the time, and this year it was Shekhar Mehta, he is from India. He appointed me to be the president's representative, basically to stand in for him in his place at the district conference of District 9705, I'm sorry, in New South Wales.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was lucky enough to attend district conference in Temora and represent Rotary International.
Excellent. And I know we were going to attempt to meet face to face, and there was a lot going on both for you and for me, and it was going to be tricky. So we've decided to do it this way, which is perfectly fine. I know you were planning on doing the coastal track walk. Did you get to do it?
I did. I did Coast Track, and I did the full 60 kilometers. I will tell you that at about 20 kilometers in, I was thinking, okay, this is going to be a little bit of work. At 40 kilometers, I was thinking that I was going to die, but but I, dug down deep, got some extra willpower, ate some more food, had some more water and some Gatorade, and was able to complete the entire 60-kilometer walk for Beyond Blue, for mental health in Australia.
Okay. Wonderful.
That was the recipient of the funds that we raised, and I'm a Rotarian from Australia, invited me to join her team, and I am so excited that I had the opportunity to do that. I will say now, though, that I will tick that box off and say, yes, I probably don't need to watch or walk 60K again anytime soon.
No, 60K is a long way. I think the most I've ever walked in a day is 30. My son has walked 80. And
wow.
Yeah, I saw what he was like at the end of that. It's not something I want to do. Where do you go in Iowa to, train yourself in climbing steps?
Basically, ironically, you either walk up and down steps within your home, or I have one of those aerobic exercise steps that I used years ago. I dug that out, and I would turn on the television and I would step up and over, up and over, up and over for an entire movie is what I would do. And so that's really how I trained. It is very flat here. I might say that we have a hill, but it's not really a hill compared to all the steps and everything that I walked in Sydney. So that's how I trained.
Okay. Well, we didn't meet face to face, but it is lovely to see you over Zoom and to hear more about your work and your thoughts on Rotary. Tell us about your contact with Rotarians those many years ago in Australia.
So I was very fortunate 25 years ago to have received a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship. And this is a scholarship that was for graduate level work. And so I received a Rotary Scholarship and came to Canberra. Through the University of Canberra, I did my graduate diploma in professional and technical writing. And so I was lucky enough to get on a plane, come to Australia and study for a year. And I can honestly tell you that when I left, I really didn't know much about Rotary. I knew that it was a local service club. I knew that they were fairly new in my community. I knew basically what I had gone to the library and read about Rotary's history.
Yes.
Which wasn't a whole lot because the internet was just kind of starting back then. And so, but my first impression of Rotary was the moment I got off the airplane, and a Rotarian by the name of John Carter from the Belconnen Rotary Club in Canberra met me at the airport. And from that moment, I felt immediately welcomed by the entire Rotary Club. I had families that lent me bedding and towels and linen for my flat at university. I had people that gave me posters and wall hangings and said, pick these out. Is there something that'll make it feel more like home for you? I had people inviting me to their homes for dinner with their families, and people inviting me on, Rotary events to do different things. And I just instantly felt the international friendship and hospitality that I'd heard about with Rotary, but I had never experienced or never realized how truly true that it was.
Yes.
And so that moment, I landed, they got me all settled at university. I went to Rotary every Wednesday evening. I went and really became part of the Rotary family. And those individuals, I still keep in touch with many of them to this day. I saw many of them when I was there a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And, there's a few that have passed on, but it truly opened my world. That scholarship did. And
how did you come to get that scholarship? How does one apply and receive a scholarship to do such a wonderful thing?
Yeah, so they're now called global grants. They used to be called ambassadorial scholar grants. Now they're called global grants. But it was, interestingly enough, a gentleman from my hometown who was family friends of my parents had said to me one day, Kathy, have you ever thought about studying overseas? And I said, no, I'm from a rural small town in Iowa. I barely thought about going to another state, let alone going to another country. And he just said, Kathy, I think this would be a good scholarship, something you'd be interested in. So I filled out the application, not even thinking that I would get the scholarship. And I was lucky enough to do so. But it's a Rotary program. Global scholars, you can apply for a global scholarship pretty much any time. And local Rotary clubs would know how to get you in contact with getting that application. But it's an amazing experience. Rotary is in more countries around the world than the United Nations. And so wherever there's a Rotary club, that's an opportunity that you could study in as an ambassadorial scholar or now a global scholar.
Yeah, interesting to know.
Yeah.
I just think of you being in Iowa and not having hardly left the state and ending up overseas as a young woman, and all the experiences you must have had in Australia over the course of a year, the positive relationship that you had with Rotary. I'm imagining you went back to the States and you linked up with the local Rotary club there, and that's where your journey started with Rotary, or continue with Rotary, or was there, how did that work out?
Not quite. One would have thought that might have happened, but I was fired up about Rotary, though. I mean, I had done service projects with the local club in Canberra. I had spoke to other Rotary clubs in the area. I had made these lifelong friendships, and so I was really fired up about Rotary. I came back to the U.S. and I told myself, I'm going to get involved in Rotary. There was nothing that was going to stop me. Well, interesting thing about that is I came back, I got a job, started working, got busy, life kind of happened, life went on. And I kept telling myself, I need to go to a Rotary Club meeting or find a Rotary Club. And life just kept happening. And the next thing I know, it's 10 years later. 10 years had passed. And I was having a conversation with a gentleman in my community where I live now. I had recently moved to this community, and a gentleman said to me, well, you were a scholar in Australia, weren't you? And I said, yes. And he says, through Rotary, right? And I said, yes. He says, would you like to come to Rotary with me next week? And I said, yes, I would. And I actually walked in and I told them, they didn't even ask me to become a member. I told them I was going to become a member. I said, where do I sign up? Because it instantly, that passion for Rotary was reignited through me. It wasn't that I didn't want to join. It wasn't that I didn't have the passion to join. It's just that simply life got in the way and no one asked me. So it wasn't that prompt for me to get involved. And so happy to report that 15 years ago, I did become a Rotarian. Actually, it was just my 15th anniversary a few days ago in Rotary. And I haven't looked back since. And the opportunities, the world that opened up to me when I was a scholar 25 years ago, I feel like there's a lot of those opportunities and the world opening back up to me now by just being an average Rotarian.
Yes, yes. It makes you wonder how many people have had some really positive connections with Rotary over the years and perhaps would like to link in further. They'd like to go to a Rotary club, but they don't know where they meet. And as you say, it just passes out of your mind, perhaps after a while. What lessons do you share with other people about your experience, and how's that relevant for local Rotary club today?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think that typically when I speak to a lot of clubs, I share that exact story to remind them to stay in touch with your Rotary alumni, whether it's youth exchange, the high school exchange level, whether it's your global scholars, like what I was, whether it's someone who does another kind of friendship exchange, or the Rotary Youth Leadership Awards, a RILA event for students as well. Keep in touch with those individuals, like we call them our Rotary alumni, because they have a connection, and odds are their life was positively affected by Rotary. And sometimes it just takes that little bit to ask. And so I tell that story to remind people to keep in touch with their alumni, to make sure you ask, because sometimes we take that for granted. I'll admit, I have friends that I've told a lot of Rotary stories to, and I just haven't asked them to come and to visit a meeting, or to see what we're up to, or to come to a service project. And so I've learned that by telling the stories, though, that's how we learn. I could just stand in front of a group and I could say, you need to keep in touch with alumni, you need to ask. But when I tell my story, it becomes much more relatable and much more real. And so I like to share, like to talk about the power of storytelling, and that everyone has a Rotary story, whether you've been a Rotarian for a short amount of time or a long amount of time. There are things that there's a reason you're where you're at, and it doesn't have to be a grandiose story, and your story may change over time, but you have a Rotary story. And
Yes.
we need to share those Rotary stories, because that's really what makes us relevant, and that's really how we connect with people, and how we will increase membership, and how we will sustain ourselves as an organization, is by doing good in the world, but by also sharing that we're doing that good in the world, and our passions. We're like-minded people, so we need to share that.
There's some good reminders there, and yeah, the power of story. Let me tell you my story, how I got involved.
I'd love to hear it.
Well, I'd got into bird watching pretty much over COVID. I thought, okay, I'm going to explore my local area more, as so many people did, and bought a camera and some binoculars and went out and started identifying birds. That led to what we call a pelagic trip, which is when a bunch of bird watchers jump on a small boat and they go out to the continental shelf and they find things like albatross. And on that trip, it was just a weekend, but on that trip was a fellow called Robert Shaw. Now, Robert is the president presently of the Parks Rotary Club in the central west of New South Wales. I'd been running a podcast called Animated Living, which is linked to my life coaching business. Okay. And he got in touch with me after the trip a couple of months later, and he said, you do podcasts, don't you? And I said, well, yeah. He said, would you be interested in doing a few podcasts for Rotary for when clubs can't get a speaker, or they can't meet for whatever reason, or maybe they live in a regional area and they haven't got as easy access to clubs would have in the city to speakers? I said, sure. So he provided me some names of people that he thought I should talk to, and I interviewed them like I'm interviewing you now, and provided that back to him as a Rotary podcast, not thinking that I would join Rotary. But he said to me, look, it would make a lot of sense if you join Rotary, you can join our club in Parks. Now, I live in Sydney, which is a fair way from Parks, but I said, okay, if you think that's a good thing, yeah, I'd love to join. And yeah, like you're saying, I'm not going to join Rotary. Probably, most people aren't going to just join unless they're invited to join. And he drew me into that world, into his circle. And he thought, well, here's someone who has done some volunteer work for Rotary and providing these podcasts. it would make sense for him to join. So I've got this lovely relationship now with this little club out in the central west of New South Wales that I visit from time to time and provide podcasts like this for.
That's fantastic. And that's really, that's part of the message that I shared when I was there at the district conference, and part of the message that I think a lot of us are sharing, that we may have a perception in our mind of what Rotary used to be, or what I will occasionally say, my grandfather's Rotary Club. And just because I have this visual of a lot of older gentlemen getting together for lunch, and that's what I thought of. But Rotary is really what we make it. And that's how we're going to stay relevant. And it's really about being community minded, being like-minded, wanting to do something for your community, whether it's your local community, whether it's a regional community, or whether it's an international community. That's really what Rotary is about. And how we do that is really up to us. We can redefine the boundaries of Rotary. Like you just said, you're in Sydney and you're part of the Parks Rotary Club. It's not geographically right there, which is perfectly fine. Technology helps us with that. Our flexibility with membership helps us with that. As long as we're all doing the greater good, we can do things in our Rotary clubs that work for us individually and work for us collectively as a group. So that's the joy of Rotary. We're part of this bigger organization, but we have the autonomy to really do what works for us and what works in our community.
How do we find out what works for our community? How do we ask that question and answer that question?
Well, I think first of all, it's twofold in my opinion. The first thing is we need to ask, be aware, and listen. Sometimes it's hard to have difficult conversations, and sometimes it's hard to admit the issues that may be in our areas or in our communities. But we really truly need to listen to the needs of our communities, and it's okay to do a community assessment or a survey, or even if it's something informal, to find out, get some leaders together, whether they're Rotarians or not, bring them together and talk about what is needed in our community. Where are we falling short? What are some things? Because from those assessments and those needs, it's amazing how you put a few Rotarians together and ideas turn into projects, which turn into reality. And before you know it, people are making a huge impact on their communities in ways that other folks might not have thought of, just because we simply asked to see what is needed. And that's one thing. And then the other thing is, try it. Don't be afraid to try something. You know what? If it doesn't work, that's okay. We'll try something else. But it's okay to try. It's better to try to do something, even if we're not 100% certain it's going to make the impact or do what we want it to do, but we won't know unless we try. And that's the same way with membership and growing our membership. If you have an idea for a mixer or a service project to invite people to learn about Rotary, just try it. It's okay. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And hey, if you get 5 people there, those 5 people might be 5 very committed individuals who will still help the greater cause. It's just, sometimes we set our expectations way out here, and if we don't meet those, we're disappointed. But as long as we're incrementally moving forward and doing good in our communities, I think that's really what we want to strive for.
Have you got some examples of that innovation that you're speaking about, where a club perhaps who were challenged by perhaps dwindling membership or aging membership and a disconnect with their community, who have now become a thriving Rotary presence in their community?
I think there's a couple examples, and one that I'd like to share is a club. I'll share a couple, but one is a club that is a very small club, definitely dwindling, only 9 members in a very rural area in Iowa, actually in my district. And everyone on the district level, or everyone on the outside looking in at that community, thought, wow, this club's not going to last, be around much longer. Their members are older. They're just, they're dwindling away. And so it was really interesting when we went to visit that club, because we realized, I went with another person to visit this club. We realized that this club has a connection with like every other organization in the community. They may be a small club and an aging club, but I tell you what, they still had their finger on almost every community activity or every community event in that community. But what they were doing is they were thinking of ideas, and then other organizations were actually doing those things and getting the credit for it. And so what was really interesting about this is it wasn't about getting the credit. It was just repackaging a few things. It was pretty amazing how once that club started co-branding, if you will, certain events with whoever they were partnering with. So whether it was the Boy Scouts or whoever, when they co-branded, then all of a sudden people were seeing that, oh, that's what Rotary does. And they know what they're doing. And guess what? It didn't take long before they had a few new members. You had some Scout parents that were like, maybe we should get involved in Rotary. And now all of a sudden they have more members in the club, and their people are seeing what they're doing in the organization. They're not the hidden behind the scenes. And so that's just one way of thinking out of the box to make sure, Rotarians in general, we don't like to tell everyone everything that we do. We're very humble people, but we need to once in a while brand and share that, because that's how we're going to attract other members. And so for them, it was purely kind of rebranding and then being open to new ideas, for a club to come in, or for members to join. And that leads me to my second example of another club, a club that was dwindling in members as well, an aging club, not very many young members. And when I say not very many young, not very many under even 60, to be honest with you. And for that club, it simply took having the hard conversation, the conversation of, do we want to exist in another 10 years? Or are we just going to let this fizzle out? And that club believed that they had a purpose in the community. So they knew that they needed some newer members with some fresh ideas. And so for them, it was really about kind of letting go of some of what they considered their traditions in Rotary, and letting a younger generation who were interested in community service and doing things in their community, but actually letting them kind of redefine what the club was going to do and how the club was going to operate. It changed from a lunchtime meeting to a 5 o'clock after hours meeting, to help work with schedules. It changed from being a club that was known to do a pancake breakfast every year fundraiser, to a club that was about being out in the community doing service projects. They didn't put all the emphasis on their fundraisers. And so just by doing that and having those older members, the older members didn't leave membership. They just stepped back, and they were still very supportive, but knew that the new generation, or the next generation, not new generation, next generation, had some different ideas. And it's okay to try some different things. And that meant meeting at a different time. That meant, shifting our focus from just fundraising and then writing checks to organizations to actually doing hands-on service. And so that has regenerated that club and helped to grow that club as a result.
Yes, it's a challenge that older organizations that have been around for a while, let's just say that, they have to, our world has changed in so many ways and will continue to change. What are the values? Who are we? What's our identity? What are we seeking to do? What's our vision? What's our purpose? How we implement that and how we reach that, how we express those values is going to change in every generation. And a generation sort of comes and goes every 10 or 15 years. So we're constantly needing to rethink how we operate.
And I think that's key right there is in all reality, when you dig down and peel the layers back and think about it, regardless of the generation, when I say Rotarians are like-minded individuals, we really are. Most of our values, regardless of the generation we're from, whether we're younger, whether we're older, whether we've been in a long time or we're newer, we have that sense of community, that sense of volunteering, that sense of helping. And so if we peel back all the other things and we know that that's our common ground, how we implement it can change and it can adjust. And it can also exist in various ways. You know, we can have a club that has a focus on hands-on service, but yet some members aren't able to do that. That's fine. They might just provide some money or provide some support in other ways for that. And so it's really trying to bring everyone together, knowing that we have a common cause, we have a common thought process. It's just we have some different ways of implementing it, and that's okay. It's okay. It's, you know, it works for all of us a different way, and so I think there's a lot to be learned on both sides of the spectrum. Whether you're a long-term Rotarian, an older Rotarian, a newer Rotarian, a younger Rotarian, I think we can all learn from each other, and it becomes a bit of co-mentoring when it comes to generations, if you will. And I think that's something that in this day and age is good for all of us.
What are the threats and opportunities of moving to a more online space for Rotary?
So I think, you know, generally speaking, in the past, the attitude of Rotary is, you know, we do best when we're together in person, and that's when we make our connections and friendships and all of those things. And that's really how we get inspired and the sparks are formed to do projects and the different things. But I think if there's one thing that COVID has taught us, it's that we can do things electronically and via Zoom. Now, yes, it's not the same as seeing a person in person, but we can bring together the internationality of our organization. I've seen clubs who, you know, the general typical Rotary club probably doesn't have a lot of interaction on the international level with Rotary, unless you've done an exchange or you've done a friendship visit or something like that. And so what COVID has done is it's forced all of us to go into this Zoom world. And with this Zoom world, we can now have speakers from around the world. A couple Rotary International presidents ago, Holger Kanak, you know, his entire term was during COVID. Something he was able to do, he was from Germany, he visited clubs in their online club meetings.
Yeah.
Typically, a Rotary International president doesn't have time to visit individual clubs. It must be a larger district gathering or something like that. And he was able to speak and interact with at the club level. And so I think it has opened up the world to our club level, the Rotary International, that we can have international speakers. We can have clubs that you're not geographically all in one area. We've seen cause-based clubs that start up that have people, they only meet electronically, and there's people from all over the world. There's a club to end sex trafficking, and they have people from all over the entire world, and they're a cause-based club. So it's really opened our eyes to we can think out of the box a little bit more. While there's still a lot of importance to meeting in person and wanting to meet in person and to do those things, I think we can have a good balance, and it can just enhance our organization overall moving forward. So I think it's a time, you know, kind of forced time of change, but it's also a time for us to embrace that change and know that now's the time we can try some things different. I had club members who'd never been on Zoom or rarely used their computer before, and now I wouldn't say they're experts, but they're pretty darn good at it.
Yeah.
And we've had some great conversations with some people from around the world in Rotary to hear what they're doing.
I don't think there'll ever be a substitute for face-to-face interpersonal communication, but to deny ourselves the opportunity that we have in this day and age to connect beyond the physical limitations of being in a particular town or city is just tremendous, and opens up a whole range of opportunities for membership. Well, speaking of innovation, you have been acting as a trainer of the trainers who train the district governors. And how does that work during a time when people aren't traveling, people aren't connecting together in any one physical space between March 2020 and March 2022? Yeah, how's that been for you?
So typically how International Assembly, which is our training event for all of the district governors from around the world, over 500 districts around the world, we usually bring them all into one location and do a week of intense training. And obviously with COVID, the last 2 years, that hasn't happened. And so how that typically works is we bring all of those district governors in. We have 40 training leaders from around the world. We usually train in 8 different languages. And we have interpretation as well. So we have interpreters. And so we bring those training leaders in advance. The seminar trainers, which I'm one of, there's 2 of us around the world that were selected for this. We're the training leaders. So we train those trainers on behalf of the Rotary International incoming president. And then they train during that week, all of those 500 plus governors. And so obviously when we're not able to get together in person, training still needs to go on. And so we had to adapt with Rotary International staff fairly quickly 2 years ago, and then also this last year to train virtually. And so when you think about this is logistically interesting on a lot of levels. We're dealing with multiple time zones. When you bring everyone in one spot, everyone's on the same time, whether they're jet lagged or not, you're at least on the same time. Now we're dealing with time differences that can range from Iowa to Australia, Japan, Europe. We have all of these countries, Africa. And so we're dealing with multiple time zones. We're dealing with interpretation via Zoom with our interpreters. We're dealing with Zoom fatigue. How long do you leave people on a session at one time? It's not like putting them in a room for all day. We can't do that online. And so and then on top of it, training your 40 trainers to do this via Zoom and to be engaging and energetic, and to make sure that they can facilitate a breakout session online and notice hands going up and work the technology and the chat feature and everything else. And so it really brought a new level of training to the forefront for us. And so we had to teach people that even though you feel like your cheek muscles are falling, you have to keep smiling. Yes. Because people are seeing you on screen and they're zeroing in on your face a lot more than you normally. Yes, when you're in a room, but people will look away or something, and on screen they're really watching you. And so a lot of different things that we had to work through and train. And hopefully, I think we successfully pulled off 2 years of that. Now we're really hoping that in January of 2023, that it can happen in person again. But it was a learning experience for me. It was definitely a growth opportunity for me, and I'm grateful to Rotary for that. But it is a little different than in person.
Yeah, for sure. Well, my professional background is in adult education, and it's hard enough keeping the attention of adults, in creative and engaging ways. And then you are really times 10, aren't you, when you go into a virtual world and have to continue to do that. But it also opens up opportunities for people perhaps from far-flung places to get there and participate in that training, who otherwise may struggle to be there. So everybody's facing this. This is Rotary, this is businesses, this is education facilities, this is church groups. Everyone is challenged by this season that we've been in, and we've all made mistakes. Some things have gone terribly awful. And other times we've gone, hey, that wasn't so bad, or we've learned something and we've adapted and we'll all be better for it.
I would agree. And it goes back to a few of the things that I've said probably over and over today is, it's okay to try some things. And if it doesn't work, we just try something else.
Yeah.
It's perfectly fine. That's how we learn. We make a few mistakes along the way, but hopefully we're improving the entire time as well.
We have a new International Rotary President starting on July 1, whose name is Jennifer Jones, who I believe is a good friend of yours or a mentor to you in some way.
Yes.
What's your history with Jennifer?
So Jennifer, yes, she will be the first female president for all of Rotary International. And it's Jennifer, I got to know her quite a few years ago when I was a district governor. Shortly after I was a governor, she became a director. And so directors are those individuals that sit on the board of directors for Rotary International from our regions, our zones, if you will. And so Jennifer was a director when I was the district governor. So I had the pleasure of meeting her in person, got to know her a little bit. And over the years, she's one of those people that she's really inspiring. And we happen to have a conversation. This has been probably 8 years ago now. And she had asked me, she goes, well, what big ideas do you have? And the reason she asked me this is because I was part of a young professionals summit at Rotary International in Evanston, outside of Chicago, Illinois. And at the time, I was 40, so I was kind of on the upper edge of that young professional thing, but I was invited and I came out of that and she asked me, she goes, what are some big ideas you have? And I threw some ideas at her that I thought, there's no way Rotary's ever going to do these. And one of them was an RV trip, a caravan trip across to going through communities and doing service projects, random acts of kindness, media events so that people learned what Rotary was. And I pitched it to her with a few other friends. And we were going to do this for a few months. She said, how about we try it as a pilot? And we ended up doing 10 days. And she joined us on that. And it was amazing. We went from Pennsylvania in the US all the way to Iowa, spent 10 days doing everything from water walks to show people how far many women and children around the world have to walk every day to get clean water, to showing how Shelter Box, which is a partner of Rotary, has temporary housing for natural disaster areas, just a variety of things. And it was a great way to engage social media, traditional media, really share the story of Rotary. And so Jennifer has always taught me to think big, think outside the box, and not be afraid to try something. And so that's where you hear a lot of these messages. Many of them have come from her in a way. That's what she's taught me with Rotary, and that whole, we're like-minded. It's just, how do we figure out then how to make the best impact? And so I am super excited that Jennifer will be leading our organization starting July 1st. And if you ever have the opportunity to meet her, she is a fireball. She's dynamic and will be a great advocate for our organization around the world.
Yeah, well, we're all looking forward to the appointment of Jennifer Jones, and it will be, as you say, great for me to meet her at some point, either online, maybe she'll come on, we can have a little Zoom chat for the benefit of Rotary clubs around the world. And it's also been wonderful meeting you, Kathy. Thank you so much for coming on. As I say, I'm new to Rotary, so I'm learning so much. The questions I ask, I'm asking because I'm genuinely interested in how things work, the challenges that we face, how we can go forward in a positive way. So I'm learning a lot. Thank you for educating me, and thank you for coming on and being a part of this podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and go Rotary.